I never believed in love. Not real love anyway. Love was a tool, a weapon people used to manipulate and control. I had seen it all: gold diggers, social climbers, and desperate women willing to do anything for a piece of my wealth. It amused me how predictable they were. That's why when my so-called friends challenged me to marry the ugliest, most pitiful woman I could find as a joke, I didn't hesitate. It was just a game to me, a test of how far I could push my limits. And that's how I met her. She was crouched near a trash can, her bony fingers clawing through leftover scraps of food. Her face was hidden behind tangled, greasy hair, and her clothes were barely holding together. The smell of neglect clung to her like a second skin. Passers-by either ignored her or stepped away in disgust. Her, I said, smirking at my friends. She'll do. They burst into laughter, slapping my back, already entertained by the humiliation they thought I would endure. But I didn't care. This wasn't about them. This was about proving that I could control any situation, no matter how absurd. I stepped toward her, expecting her to flinch, to scurry away like the others. Instead, she raised her head slowly, revealing sharp, intelligent eyes beneath all the filth. There was something unsettling about the way she looked at me, like she could see right through me. "Do you want to get married?" I asked bluntly, half expecting her to run. Her lips curled into the faintest smile. "What's the catch?" I liked her answer. She wasn't stupid. That was a surprise. "No catch," I lied. "Just a roof over your head, food, money, and a new life. In exchange, you become my wife." She wiped a strand of hair from her face, considering. "All right," she said finally. "But don't regret it." I laughed. What could I possibly regret? The wedding was a spectacle. My high society friends and family watched in horrified amusement as I stood at the altar beside a woman who looked like she had been dragged through hell. My mother nearly fainted. My father shook his head, muttering about the shame I was bringing to the family name. And my bride? She didn't flinch. She stood with a straight back, her chin lifted as if she belonged there, as if she wasn't wearing a borrowed dress that barely fit her frail frame. There was a silent defiance in her eyes, something that sent a strange chill down my spine. As soon as we said our vows, my friends exploded into laughter. The humiliation I was supposed to feel never came. Instead, I felt something far worse: unease. Who exactly had I just married? That night, as I entered our bedroom, expecting disgust, tears, or fear, I got none of that. She sat at the edge of the massive bed, her fingers tracing the silk sheets, her face unreadable. "Why did you agree to this?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. She lifted her eyes to mine, and for the first time, I realized just how wrong I had been about her. "I should be asking you the same thing," she murmured. Something about the way she said it made my chest tighten. I had no idea that by morning, my entire life would be turned upside down. I didn't sleep that night. Something about her presence unsettled me. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't overwhelmed. She wasn't even interested in me. Instead, she moved around the massive bedroom like she had lived in luxury all her life. She touched the silk curtains, the expensive sculptures, the chandelier hanging above us, but not with the awe of someone experiencing wealth for the first time. It was like she was remembering it. "Who are you?" I finally asked. She turned to me, her lips curling into a small, knowing smile. "Your wife." I wanted to laugh, but something in my gut told me this wasn't funny anymore. I had expected a weak, desperate woman, someone I could control. But there was something terrifyingly calm about her. That's when she walked to the bathroom, closed the door, and locked it. I heard the shower turn on, and then I noticed something odd. A small, faded scar on her wrist. It wasn't a normal scar. It looked deliberate, like something had been burned into her skin a long time ago. A symbol. I frowned, stepping closer. That was when my phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "What have you done?" My blood ran cold. I glanced at the bathroom door, then back at the message. Who the hell had sent this? Before I could reply, another message popped up. "You have no idea who she really is. Get out before it's too late." I stiffened. This had to be one of my friends messing with me. Maybe they thought the bet was still funny. But something didn't feel like a joke anymore. I heard the water stop, the bathroom door unlocked, and she stepped out. My breath caught in my throat. She was beautiful. The layers of dirt and grime were gone, revealing smooth, unblemished skin. Her hair, once tangled and greasy, now fell in long, silky waves around her shoulders. Her features, sharp cheekbones, full lips, piercing eyes were striking, almost unnerving. And she was looking at me like she knew she had shocked me. "What's wrong?" she asked, tilting her head. I forced a smirk, masking my unease. "Nothing. Just a bit of a transformation." She smiled, stepping closer. "Did you expect me to stay ugly forever?" Something about her voice sent a shiver down my spine. That night I barely slept. I kept staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my head. The way she had looked at me, the way she carried herself, the way she seemed completely unfazed by everything. This wasn't normal. I had married a beggar on a bet. I should have been dealing with someone overwhelmed, scared, desperate to please me. Instead, I was facing a woman who acted like she belonged in this life. I needed answers. The next morning, while she was still asleep, I stepped out of the bedroom and made a call to one of my private investigators. "I need you to find out everything you can about my wife," I said, keeping my voice low. There was a pause. "Sir, what's her name?" I froze. That's when it hit me. I had married her, brought her into my home, shared my life with her, and I didn't even know her real name. When I returned to the room, she was awake, sitting by the window, sipping a cup of coffee. I watched her silently. She didn't look like a woman who had spent years on the streets. There were no signs of malnourishment, no hesitation in her movements. She wasn't adjusting to luxury. She was returning to it. Finally, I spoke. "What's your name?" She took a slow sip of coffee before turning to face me. "Why do you want to know?" I frowned. "Because you're my wife, and I don't marry strangers." She laughed. A soft, knowing laugh. "Oh, but you did." That's when I knew. I hadn't married a beggar. I had married a ghost from my past. My investigator called me back that afternoon. His voice was tight, urgent. "Sir, I don't know how to say this, but your wife. She's not who you think she is." I gripped my phone. "Tell me everything." A pause. 10 years ago, there was a girl, a wealthy heiress who disappeared after a house fire killed her entire family. No remains were ever found. The case went cold. My breath hitched. Her name was... A soft click. I turned. She was standing behind me, and she had just ended the call. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears as she slowly lowered the phone from her hand. "You shouldn't have done that," she murmured. My mouth was dry. "Who are you?" She took a step closer, her gaze dark and unreadable. "You tell me, husband." That's when I remembered the scar on her wrist. The symbol. It wasn't just any mark. It was the emblem of a family name I thought had been erased from existence. And I had just married its last surviving member. I stumbled back. "This is a joke, right? You're just..." Her expression didn't change. "I let you think you had power over me," she said quietly. "I let you believe you were in control. But you never were." I swallowed hard. Why? Why go through all this? The disguise, the marriage. She tilted her head. "Because I wanted to see if you had changed." "What the hell does that mean?" She took a deep breath, as if steadying herself. "You don't remember me, do you?" I stared at her, my mind racing. Then suddenly the memory hit me like a freight train. A burning house, a girl screaming for help, my father pulling me away, telling me to forget what I saw. A girl with the same eyes, the girl I had left behind, the girl who should have died. I felt like the air had been knocked from my lungs. "No," I whispered. "That's impossible." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Is it?" I shook my head, stepping back. "That was years ago. You..." "I survived," she said, her voice sharper now. "And I waited. I waited until I could finally face the man who watched my family burn and did nothing." I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. She wasn't just here to be my wife. She was here for revenge. And I had walked right into her trap. My heart slammed against my ribs as I stared at her. This couldn't be real. This had to be some twisted joke. "You're lying," I said, my voice hoarse. "You're messing with me." Her expression didn't waver. "Am I?" she murmured, stepping closer. "Your smart husband. Tell me. How did a homeless woman, covered in filth, with nothing to her name, manage to look you in the eye like an equal? How did she walk into your mansion and act like she belonged? How did she know exactly how to play your little game?" I swallowed hard, my mind racing, because none of it made sense. None of it had ever made sense. She wasn't just some random beggar. She had chosen me. "You planned this," I whispered. She smiled. And then she leaned in, her voice a breath against my ear. For years, I should have felt angry. I should have felt betrayed. But all I felt was fear. I had spent my entire life in control of my money, my power, the people around me. I had dictated every game, every rule. But she had played me from the very beginning. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. She pulled back, watching me. "I want you to remember." "Remember what?" Her gaze darkened. "The night my family burned." I felt my chest tighten. I did remember. I had tried to forget, tried to bury it under years of wealth and distraction. But I remembered. The screams, the fire, the terrified girl on the other side of the flames. And my father's voice, cold and commanding. "Walk away. This is none of our concern." I had listened. I had left her there. And now she was standing in front of me, very much alive. "You think I wanted revenge?" she said, tilting her head. "That I spent years crawling through hell just to get back at you?" My throat was dry. "Didn't you?" Her eyes flashed. "No, husband. I didn't want revenge." She took a slow step forward. "I wanted justice." Something about the way she said it made my stomach twist. I had been prepared for anger, hatred, a woman who wanted to destroy me. But this was worse. This was a woman who had already won. I turned, my mind scrambling for an exit. I needed to get out. I needed space, time to think. But before I could move, she spoke again. "You're wondering why I married you, aren't you?" she said softly. I clenched my jaw. "You tell me." She smiled. "Because I wanted to see if you were still the same coward who walked away." Her words cut deeper than I expected. I had spent my life proving I was powerful, that I was above weakness. But in her eyes, I was still that boy, still the one who ran. "Did I pass your little test?" I bit out. She studied me for a long moment. Then quietly, "No." The air felt heavy. I had built my life on the idea that I was untouchable, that money could fix everything, that power meant never having to look back. But now none of it mattered, because she had been watching, waiting, and she had dragged me back to the one moment I had spent years trying to erase. I took a breath, forced myself to focus. "I can make this right," I said. "Whatever you want. Money, power." She laughed. A quiet, bitter sound. "You think this is about money?" she whispered. "That's adorable." My stomach twisted, because deep down I already knew the answer. Nothing I owned could fix this, because what she wanted, what she needed, was something I couldn't buy. She wanted me to pay. I took a step back. "What do you want from me?" She tilted her head, studying me. Then, slowly, she reached into her pocket and pulled out something small and metallic. A lighter. My breath caught. "You think I forgot?" she murmured. How it felt to be surrounded by fire, to hear my family scream while I begged for someone, anyone, to save me. She flicked the lighter on. The small flame flickered between us. I didn't move. "Tell me, husband," she whispered, her voice laced with something dark. "Do you believe in justice?" A bead of sweat rolled down my temple. I was the one with the power, the money, the resources. And yet, standing in front of her, I felt completely helpless. She didn't care about my wealth, my status, my name. She only cared about one thing. "Justice," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Or revenge." She held my gaze. "Sometimes, they're the same thing." My chest tightened, because she wasn't wrong. And for the first time in my life, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't the hunter. I was the prey. I took a breath, forcing my mind to stay sharp. She wanted to see fear, weakness. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. I made a mistake, I said. I walked away that night. I should have done something. She watched me silently. You think admitting it is enough? She asked. No, I swallowed. But it's a start. Her expression didn't change. Then, slowly, she closed the lighter. The flame disappeared. I exhaled. But I wasn't safe. Not yet. Because the game wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The silence between us stretched, thick with something unspoken. She had tested me, pushed me to the edge of my control, but she hadn't destroyed me. Yet, I straightened, regaining my composure. So what now? I asked, keeping my voice even. She took a slow step toward me, her expression unreadable. Now you prove yourself. I frowned. Prove myself. She leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. I want the truth. My breath caught. The truth about that night, she continued. Who was really responsible? Who lit the fire? Who gave the order? I stiffened. I don't know. She studied me, her gaze piercing. Liar. My jaw tightened. I was there. I saw the fire. But I didn't light it. She nodded slowly, as if considering something. But you know who did? My stomach twisted. Because she was right. She saw it the moment it crossed my face. Recognition. Guilt. Fear. She had spent years chasing ghosts, searching for answers. And now she had finally found the one man who could give them to her. I clenched my fists. If I tell you the truth, what happens next? Her lips curved into a small, humorless smile. Then we burn the real monsters. A chill ran down my spine. She wasn't just here for me. She was here for revenge. And I was the only one who could give it to her. I had spent my life surrounded by power. My father, his business partners, they weren't just rich. They were untouchable. At least that's what they thought. I took a shaky breath. It wasn't an accident, I admitted. Her eyes darkened. The fire, I continued. It was planned. She nodded, as if she had already known. Who? I hesitated. But I already knew there was no turning back. My father, I said, my voice hollow. For the first time, she looked surprised. Then, slowly, she exhaled. I always suspected, she murmured. But I never had proof. I swallowed. Now you do. She stared at me for a long moment, as if weighing my words. Then, good, she said softly. Because I'm going to make him pay. I should have stopped her. I should have warned her that my father wasn't a man who could be threatened. But part of me wanted her to succeed. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking at a beggar or a victim. I was looking at the only person who had ever made me face the truth. I met her gaze. What do you need from me? She smirked. Everything. We spent the next few days preparing. She wasn't reckless. She was calculated, precise. She had spent years planning, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now, with me on her side, she finally had an inside man. I gave her what she needed, the names, the accounts, the secrets my father had buried. And as I did, I realized something terrifying. She wasn't just after revenge. She was after justice. And there was nothing more dangerous than a woman who had nothing left to lose. The night we confronted my father, I could feel the weight of it in my chest. He sat in his grand office, sipping whiskey like he didn't have a care in the world. When we stepped inside, he barely glanced up. Son, he said, lazily swirling his drink. I was wondering when you'd come to your senses. I stiffened. She stepped forward before I could speak. Do you recognize me? She asked. My father looked at her, his brow furrowing. Then suddenly he laughed. Well, he mused. I thought we got rid of you years ago. My stomach twisted. He knew. He had always known. Her expression didn't change. You tried, she said, voice steady. But you failed. My father leaned back, amusement flickering in his eyes. And what now? You think you can walk in here and demand justice? She smiled. No, she said. I don't demand justice. She pulled out a folder, tossed it onto his desk. I brought it. My father's face darkened as he flipped through the pages. Bank records, secret deals, evidence that could bring his empire crashing down. His jaw tightened. You think this will stop me? She leaned forward, whispering, I don't need to stop you. She gestured toward the door. They will. And that's when the police stormed in. It was over in seconds. My father, dragged from his office, cursing and screaming. His empire, built on blood, crumbling around him. I stood there, watching the man I had once feared lose everything. And beside me she stood tall, stronger than I had ever seen her. She turned to me. You're free now, she said softly. I swallowed. So are you. For the first time, she smiled. The next morning, she packed her things. I watched as she folded the few belongings she had, my chest tight. You're leaving, I said. She nodded. I hesitated. Where will you go? She glanced at me. Somewhere new. I clenched my fists. Stay, I blurted. With me. She studied me, her expression unreadable. Why? I swallowed. Because I don't want this to be the end. She sighed. We were never supposed to be real, remember? I shook my head. That's not true. She bit her lip. Then what is the truth? I took a step closer. That I don't care how this started. That I don't care about the bet or the past. All I care about is you. She exhaled. And if I don't feel the same? I smiled sadly. Then I'll let you go. She stared at me for a long moment. Then, she kissed me. It wasn't a soft kiss. It wasn't sweet or hesitant. It was raw, real. When we finally pulled apart, she whispered, maybe, I don't want to leave. I grinned. Then don't. For the first time in years, I felt something I had never expected. Hope. We had started as a joke, a game, a lie. But somewhere along the way we had become something more. We weren't perfect. We were broken, flawed. But together, we were finally free. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly what I wanted. Her. Forever.